who is now, right now, teetering on the brink of oblivion, hopefully. We don't know what's going to happen. Is a man called Omar al-Bashir, who came to power in 1989, unbelievably, 30 years ago, and in a military coup, which was backed by a very curious man called Hassan al-Turabi, who was an Islamist ideologue who saw Khartoum as becoming the center of a kind of Islamic revolution that would go from Sudan on through the Middle East and into Africa. And he, for the first 10 years, the regime was extremely brutal. There was a severe crackdown on freedom of speech, on opposition politicians. People were arrested, they were put into prison, they disappeared into what we called ghost houses where they were tortured. A lot of people, including my parents, went into exile. My father was working, running a newspaper. And I think that what surprised people really was the brutality of it. I think that we had seen military coups before, but the novelist Taib Saleh famously said, where did these people come from? It was a mystery as to what had really brought about this brutality, which had not been seen. Sudan had coups and transitions from civilian government to military government and so forth, and a couple of quite spectacular popular uprisings, but never anything on this scale. So it was really, I think it was a shock to a lot of people, particularly the generation who had come into running Sudan after post-independence, when there was a belief in plurality and diversity of the Sudan.
But this is a 30-year long.
This is 30 years long, and nobody really thought he would last this long.
Yeah, our last slide basically is very interesting. Why Pakistani strongmen tend in the military not to last 30 years. That's been the experience for different reasons. But anyway, let me just compare that with the situation in the States, because we keep hearing that Trump is a strongman, that he's one of these new populist leaders, and yet the Constitution sort of works, right? Because none of what they're suffering you've got in America.
Well, I mean, Trump certainly thinks that Trump is a strongman and a popular leader. I think there's a question about whether that's actually true or whether he's just trying to do things to emulate popular strongmen. And yeah, I think the Constitution is working to a certain extent. I also think that the situation that Trump came into was different than the situation in Sudan that was entered into. Like when Trump came in, there was a somewhat functional government and civil society. Although, but I think that the checks that the Constitution was supposed to be having on him have largely failed to a certain extent. I mean, you look super skeptical.
Well,
I'll defend that.
Okay, let me suggest that the Constitution has worked. The Congress is there, the courts are there. He's had reverses. The press is still very lively. It is still very critical. A lot of the constraints are working.
But it hasn't been very long, and a lot of the really illegal things that he's done, he's been able to get away with, right? Like, so he put this ban in place, banning people from 6 majority Muslim countries from coming into the country, and the Supreme Court upheld that as legal. And they could have done it in a very narrow way that said, okay, in this exceptional circumstance, we'll agree that blah, 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 blah. Instead, they did it in an extremely broad way, where the decision says, basically, anytime the president invokes national security, he can do whatever he wants. And that's what he's relying on now to try to override Congress and build this wall. And I think similarly, the Republican-controlled Congress for 2 years didn't stand up to him in any meaningful way. I think the press attempts to stand up to him, but it isn't making a difference in terms of laws actually getting passed or not passed. So I think it's a little early to say, actually, that the Constitution has successfully worked as a check, because I think it hasn't actually held him back from doing very much.
Okay, so let's go to Zahid now. If we've got the Sudanese case, 30 years long dictatorship, and now we've just heard about the United States, whether constraints are working or not. And in Pakistan, maybe, you're somewhere in the middle where there is some popular restraint on, for instance, the sheriff. In the end, he couldn't survive because the popular base wasn't there. Is that fair?
Well, the problem with Pakistan is that elected dictators try to become democrat, and elected leaders try to become authoritarian. So that explains actually what you're asking. that why Bashir, a reigning general, did not last as Bashir did actually have, for 30 years. So that's the thing. Actually, despite now we have actually an elected leader, Imran Khan. So, and I don't know what description you have as a strong man, but how I describe him as a populous leader, and who came with the support of the people, but certainly with also some help from the military. So in a way, actually, it's a quite unique situation. Pakistan has gone to it's a three-tier transition to democracy from one elected leader to all through elections. The power has been transferred from one government to other. But I think how I see that Imran Khan has riding on this populist wave. His entire actually campaign for last so many years have been actually challenging the status quo. And that was the slogan he raised. And he also attracted the attention of young people, young Pakistani. But the problem is that when he came to power, he does not know what to do with that. He's still actually in this, what we call an opposition mindset. And what I described to Pakistani this time is not an authoritarian government, but catastrophe, which means actually the government of people who do not know how to govern. And that's the problem with this. But what I see actually, the problem in Pakistan at this point of time is unfortunate that we have gone through this three transition, but what I feel actually democratic space is shrinking. And that is basically a quite tragic, I would say. I would not say it's a dictatorship. I would not say that we don't have the democratic space altogether. But it's still actually, there's a huge challenge Pakistan is facing at this point, how to protect the space we have gained over the last 10 years.
Okay, so let's keep it as broad as that then. The democratic space is shrinking. In Sudan, yes, in Pakistan you're saying, I think you'd say in the United States as well. Now then, Rick Stroud, you studied the Second World War, and we're meant to be talking here about the rise of the strongman. You saw in your studies Churchill, Hitler, and many other cast of characters in the Second World War. Is there anything new about this?
No, I don't think there is. No, I must say that I feel like an imposter being here, because as well as being a historian, I've spent a lot of my life creating drama on television, so I'm a sort of empty-headed fiction maker, and these are very distinguished and knowledgeable people. But I have spent the last 8 years writing about, in particular, the rise of Hitler, and I would call Hitler a strong man, I mean a despicable man as well. I wouldn't call Churchill a strong man. I think that he was very, very clever. He kept England in the war, but there was a theme that began to emerge in this hall at the first session, which is that you have this notion of populism, and you have, to my knowledge, Putin and Trump, and they are two irresponsible leaders, and that description was given to them by Professor Rogan on this very, very stage, and he made a really good point, which is, as the strong men rise, it is in our power to do something about them, and if we don't do something about them, they will continue to rise and they will do great harm and damage. And I think that my contribution here is to describe what happened in the 30s when Hitler began to rise to power on a terrific wave of populism driven by the sort of failures of the Treaty of Versailles, the failures of the Allies to make a sort of decent a treaty with the Germans that they could live by, and the bad feeling that was caused by that caused an enormous wave of populism, which Hitler rode, and he rode it more and more strongly. And I'll stop. I've got more to say about this, but I'm going to stop by saying that there was a German lawyer in 1933 he was called Sebastian Felder. I'm not quite sure of his name, but he remembers 33 of the brown shirts charging around. It was very, very difficult to resist them. Hitler wasn't in power. He was in the law library doing his law, getting ready for his law exams. Brown shirts came in, and a brown shirt came up to him and said, and the librarian said, "Will the Jewish gentleman please leave now?" And a brown shirt came in and said, "Are you non-Aryan?" And Sebastian Hefner, his name was, said, "Certainly not." And he knew that in that instant he had betrayed his whole intellectual being. He said, "I felt that the law of Germany had ceased to exist and that I needed to do something about it." And what I've learned in the last 8 years of my life by writing about these things is that what the individual does is very, very important. And you think it's just little me, there's nothing I can do, but actually what you do as individuals builds up and accrues into a great thing that can oppose the tyrant and the forces of evil. And, I mean, I think that's what I would like to say. I don't have the detailed knowledge that these distinguished people have.
Well, it's very sort of idealistic, but is it? I mean, you know, take Sudan. I mean, if you're in Khartoum and you're seeing this thing, it's, you know, it'll really affect people's whole lives. I mean, in 30 years, you can be 40 years old.
Well, there's a generation.
Yeah, they know nothing else.
They've known nothing else.
And they can't resist, can they?
Well, they do resist, and I think that it's important. The point about rule of law is very important. I mean, the institutions of civil society are really key. Whenever Bashir came to power through a military coup, and Islam had already been in power as such, because the previous Prime Minister, Zahid Hussain, was a descendant of the original Mahjoub, led this huge Islamic resistance against the British back in the 19th century. So Islam was there, Numeri's September laws, which is a real perverse version of Sharia law, was in place. So what Bashir and his group brought in was a new kind of force that was to really destroy the media, to destroy opposition, to get rid of the instruments of civil society.
But I guess my point is that worked, right?
Well, that worked, but Sudan had a very strong, trade union movement beforehand and so forth. And this, you see that these people have been strong. Many of them were tortured, killed, and imprisoned, etc., exiled. But you can still see that they're trying to get back. But once you've lost these people, once you've lost the tradition of that, then you don't have the ground, foundation to go back to.
Let's just put this in the context of the United States, because we're not used to discussing the United States in comparisons of these kinds of issues, like a Sudanese guy or woman trying to think, can I resist? Or in the Second World War, someone faced with brown shirts coming into a library and this disastrous decision they have to take. Are there people in the States now who are beginning to think, actually, I need to take a stand, even if it's going to cost me something?
I think there are people in the States who are thinking that they need to take a stand, but I don't think it's costing anybody anything yet. I mean, I think, that it just hasn't gotten to that point. I think one thing that's been frustrating for a lot of us in the States who maybe have considered ourselves, whatever label you want to use, right? Like activist or the resistance, or, people in the States have been talking about the hashtag resistance, which is sort of a way to mock like the people who are resistors, but only on Twitter. Or only on Facebook, who maybe like during the day have regular jobs and then feel like they're part of the resistance just because they like repost political cartoons or something. And I think that there's a lot of frustration in communities that feel like they've been persecuted in the States for a really long time. In particular, for example, like Muslim communities since 9/11 have been highly persecuted in the States in all sorts of ways. And a lot of the Muslim groups and the Muslim advocacy groups in the States are sort of like, once the travel ban happened, we're sort of like, well, where the hell have all of you been, right? Like, we've been getting harassed at airports and we've been having trouble getting visas for 15 years and no one said anything about it. So, to a certain extent, I think it's been somewhat of a helpful wake-up call. And I think in other ways it's sort of activated people around issues that have been there the whole time, but that people have been privileged enough to not have to look at.
But I was saying,
but I mean, it's interesting. I think we're all watching Trump, with amusement, but also fascination.
Not amusement.
I was going to say, I'm glad to hear that you're amused.
Deep worry.
Not amusement, no.
Nausea.
Yeah, precisely. But we're all watching with fascination because it really is a test of your institutions and of how they work. And so the midterm elections, I mean, in many ways, Trump is very familiar as a kind of third world figure. I mean, he fits in perfectly with kind of Mubarak and now Bouteflika in Algeria and so forth, people who are trying to hold on to power in a very kind of clumsy and brutal way, but through the American system. So it's interesting to watch that something like the midterm elections did change the layout of the...
Before we come to you guys.
Yeah, I think it's a way, how one define or describe Trump. Can he be a strong man? I don't think he's strong. He can be described as a strong man, but certainly a populist one. And how do you differentiate between populism and a strong man or a dictatorship? I think what we are witnessing today, at many parts of the world, is the rise of populism. And that basically doesn't mean that it leads to authoritarian regime. Well, actually, there are also, like for example, election in Italy, Brazil. Those people who have been elected are populist leaders. But can they take the country towards an authoritarian regime? That's a big question. And similarly in Pakistan, when we are talking about Imran Khan, for example, he's a populist leader. But still actually what he may be actually, like earlier said, that every political leader has some authoritarian streak. But can he do that? And I think probably one has to also, this is very important, that the resistance, like for example when you are talking about Trump, there is a huge resistance in America against whatever he's doing. And the same thing is that I would say in Pakistan, if anyone tries to take Pakistani back to authoritarian course, it will be resisted. And Pakistan has a huge tradition of resistance.
Well, let me challenge you on Imran Khan as populist. I mean, if we look back, we had Nawaz Sharif, had a big base in Punjab, we had Bhuttos had big electoral bases. What's the difference between those leaders and their strong support amongst sections of the Pakistani public and what we're seeing now?
Well, actually, I think probably a difference, like for example, Mr. Bhutto, he was a populist leader. He was populist in the sense that what he basically challenged the status quo. Whatever actually he offered later is a different thing altogether. His popularity was based on his populist slogan. And to some extent, not exactly the same way as Mr. Bhutto did, but Imran Khan also got mobilized people on the slogan of breaking the status quo.
It's anti-establishment.
Anti-establishment, but both, and I think probably you have just mentioned about previous party led by Mr. Zardari that has a very different character than previous party had earlier. And same is with Mr. Nawaz Sharif.
Okay, but let's pick up on Jamal's point. In the United States, so there's Trump. First 2 years, he's definitely an anti-establishment candidate, and then he gets an election result that doesn't go well for him, and that is a significant check, right?
I mean, I don't know that it's a check, and I also don't think that he's anti-establishment. I think his rhetoric is anti-establishment, but his policies really are not anti-establishment, right? I mean, the only thing he's like really accomplished is this tax cut, and all that did was like take a bunch of money from like the middle and lower class Americans and give it to the corporations, which I think is the most like pro-establishment thing you could possibly do. So, I think that he's quite good at speaking like the anti-establishment populist rhetoric, but that when you actually look at his policies, that's not what he's following through on. I think the elections were a check, but getting back to your other point, like I don't think the elections were a constitutional check. I think the elections were a popular check, right? And you could say that the elections are mandated by the Constitution and get into like a technical legal argument about it, but I think the thing that's been checking Trump, and this gets to the point that Mr. Stroud was making, what is actually just is the populace rather than kind of the rule of law or any traditional institutions. And I think
I think one small aspect to it actually about nationalism, rise of nationalism. That's basically, like for example, Trump, America for America come first. And that is the slogan actually which he used to mobilize public. And same is actually we are witnessing in other countries. The rise of nationalism, which is also mixed with populism, it has become a very lethal combination, in fact.
And is that the case in Sudan?
The rise of nationalism?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think what they tried to do in Sudan was to try and suggest that Islam could be the force that would level society, so that the idea that there used to be, or there had been, hierarchies within society that prevented people from getting ahead, this would be, Islam would change this. And what it did was, it did after 30 years, it's very clear to people now that that didn't happen. What simply happened is you introduced a new hierarchy of people who were closer to Bashir and further away from Bashir.
You were unkind enough to call me over-idealistic when I said what I said. And I think the trouble is...
You took that as an insult?
No. Well, I thought I was being good number. You subsided. In which case I've misunderstood. If it is idealistic, I think the problem is that with somebody like Trump, is you don't know where he's going to end up. And at the moment he has, the constraints of the democracy. Democracy doesn't happen by accident, and it has to be defended every inch of the way. And democracy is what I believe in and what I want to defend in my own country, in Europe. So I'm horrified about us leaving Europe. It's xenophobic, it's Little England, it's despicable, I think. But if you leave these people unchecked, one minute the courts are in charge of them, before long the court's not in charge of them. You find weird laws being made, and that's what happened in Germany. And the idea that just to go on and on about it, the idea that the individual can't do anything the individual does nothing for 30 years, and he finds he can't do anything.
But the key somehow to this populist movement is the media and the information that people have, the access that people have to information that can give them people a real balanced view of what exactly is going on in the country.
Well, that's what
in the case of the US is very much what we can see, this argument that has been going on for quite a number of years, where the far right has activated the media in such a way that a certain portion of the population only gets a certain version of it.
And also create this kind of, rhetoric of fear, or for example, Trump also used Islamic phobia to some extent, and we have seen actually in various European countries too, like fear of the country being taken over by immigrants. And that basically the strongest wave of nationalism, if we see it in Europe, for example. Like, for example, Brexit. Brexit, actually, what was the underlying factor which won those people, the Brexit? But I think probably it's likely the fear of being taken over, the country being taken over by the aliens. And that is basically we've seen in many other European countries. And that has brought a certain change. What we witnessed in 1990s, borders were broken. Nationalism basically had taken back seat. And now we have seen actually the revival of nationalism all over. Like, it's not just about Britain, Brexit, but what we are witnessing in Italy, what's happening, and other countries as well.
So one of the things that we're sort of trying to grapple with here, I think, is whether something new is happening. And possibly, I think it's very interesting what you just said about the media, and possibly one of the new things that's happening is that all the social media and the changing nature of the media and this increasingly politicized media, which we're seeing particularly in the United States. So I'll ask you, Rick, in a minute about the Second World War, where the Nazis were very ahead, right, in their use of media.
But just to follow that Hitler knew that the media was going to be very important, and it obviously wasn't as sophisticated as it now is. But Goebbels, who was his Minister of Propaganda, knew that he could use the media. So what did they do? They gave almost every family in Germany a radio, so that they could talk to them directly. And there's no real difference between that and social media. It's just a little bit more sophisticated.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at. So you don't think there's anything, you don't think the technology has changed the nature of media control?
No, I mean, obviously it has a bit, because,
But who broadcast has changed, right? I mean, you're saying they gave every family a radio so everyone could listen, but the people putting out the content were still like Goebbels and Hitler. But I think the difference with social media today is that anyone who wants to can put out content.
That's absolutely true.
Right, and also anyone who wants to can pretend to be someone else putting out content. So like Putin can be 87 different like random Facebook users from Nebraska putting out pro-Trump content, and we never know the difference.
But I think when we talk about media, we have to be very clear about how to differentiate between mainstream media and what we call like social media. And that's basically being used by these people to whip up that feeling of nationalism.
I think the difference between those things is completely eroded.
Can you just say that again?
What about American press? American press, mainstream media is basically very much opposed to Trump. And what you are saying actually about Facebook and other means of this propaganda, that basically being used very effectively by them. And I think probably what we are seeing in other countries, for example, India, for example, Modi's rise is also largely because of this nationalist rhetoric and what is called Hindutva, which is mixed with religion and nationalism. So those factors are also counted.
And also, if I've understood your point, that in Germany the stuff was being broadcast by the government with a specific aim. I thought that a lot of the social media is being manipulated by governments with a specific aim, and it's an illusion on our part that somehow we're contributing and not looking fed up to a very, very sort of democratic interchange of ideas. I don't think that's true.
Oh no, I was just thinking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
get paranoid.
I guess when I'm thinking, I look very fed up. No, I mean, I think that's true to a certain extent, but I also think, I think it takes two to tango, right? I mean, I think like what was brilliant about, like you talked about fear, and I think that the counterpart to fear is anger, right? And I think all of this is manifesting quite a bit in xenophobia, right?
Yes.
And sort of like fear of the other, which is translated.
Both works.
Right.
Xenophobia as well as the fear.
Right, and so I think a lot of people in the world are afraid and they're angry, and I think what the rise of the global strongmen are playing into is the fear and the anger, and the reason that they're gaining traction is that they're playing into fear and anger that's already there. So it's not necessarily just that they're like feeding a message in. It's that they're like tapping into a message that already exists and sort of like if you're taking a wasp nest and putting a stick in it.
I think it varies from country to country and region to region when we are talking about populist movement or the authoritarian regime.
Sure.
Like for example, what is happening in Middle East. Like the factors actually which has given rise to the new authoritarian regime in Egypt or maybe actually other countries were very different, like this post-Arab Spring. So how one describe it actually is the society getting polarized or basically the collapse of the whole order, and that's how things have gone badly.
Yeah, I mean, Egypt is an interesting case, but I was thinking of something else just now, which is that actually also what's really happened I think that there is a parallel between the idea that you have the impression, or you can get the impression that social media provides a certain balance and a certain ability for truth to come through, but it is manipulated in just the same way that you're saying, and it is easily manipulated. The whole point about Facebook and messages, the whole scandal with the Russians and so forth. But what really at the end of it, and I think particularly I feel this when it comes to Brexit, what's really interesting is that you then go beyond the facts. Once people can no longer distinguish what is true and what is false, you go beyond that to a point which people call emotional intelligence, which is where you kind of say, well, it doesn't actually really matter. The facts are all, if you balance the facts up, they're all going to be the same. So you have to vote with your emotional intelligence.
Okay, so that's it. So we keep, it's very interesting having you here, because we keep coming to the point, we think something new. So we've got another new thing here, which is that we're in a dangerous world and strongmen can manipulate it because we're no longer sure what's true.
Right.
And it's a question of what people believe rather than what is actually true. But actually, that was there in the Second World War as well.
Yes, and I don't buy into this business of voting with emotional intelligence, because once intelligence has been blinded, and Trump does it every day with this wretched wall that he wants to build, and it's all about, dangerous, terrible people who are going to be kept out. We're doing the same in dear old England. We're saying it's all about immigrants, it's all keeping them out, and we should be welcoming immigrants. The immigrants should be the people that we look after, and Hitler did the same thing. It's all about the Jews, and he didn't do it in one fell swoop. He did it slowly. He made laws. He made it harder and harder, but very few Germans.
Creation of enemy figure.
Sorry?
Creation of basically an enemy figure.
Yes, and we've done it with the immigrants. He did it more specifically with the Jews, and he passed these laws over a period of about 3 years, and ordinary Germans read their newspapers and said, great, the trains are running on time, the Führer is doing a good thing, and the next thing you know, the Jews are amongst the most vilified people in the world, along with the,
But in case of Brexit, if I'm not wrong actually, the area where the Brexit was actually won the war, those places where the immigration was not much of a problem. Less immigrant population in those areas. So, like for example, London has the largest number of immigrants.
And isn't that great? But there was a man on the train looking at an Asian figure, and I heard him saying, "You'll have to go home now. I've got my country back again." Well, that's a very dangerous thing. What did I do? Nothing. I'm in the same position as somebody who watches a Jew being knocked off the pavement, and I do nothing. I walk away. If things go wrong, if I end up, and this is not just paranoid hysteria, but if things end up in 10 years' time with me in a concentration camp because I didn't keep my eye on the ball, it'll be my fault.
But just to bring us back to this post-truth world, which I told is new, was Germany in the Second World War post-truth? Yes.
Yes, it was post-truth. I mean, I think that the keys to the moral kingdom are held by people like the universities, and they should debate these things, and they should make their voices heard. And
literary festivals.
And literary festival. I mean, I think this literary festival has had a theme which I've detected, and it's certainly impacted on me, and I've drawn on my work from it. And for me, it is to do with what the individual does in these very, very extreme times, and we're drifting. 8 years ago, I said to an old soldier, "It's inconceivable there'll be another war in Europe," now I don't believe that.
I think one thing more about rise when we're talking about strongmen. Strongmen, we are talking about China, basically. At one point, it seemed that China is moving towards more democracy, but now it seems that we are back to the whole the rise of Xi actually has taken us back to the sport. And similarly, rise of Putin and then Saudi Arabia. So about economic factors. If you see actually 1990s, when this period of when it was said that liberal democracy has won, and Fukuyama's theory about the end of history. But later on, at that point of time, if you look actually, the share of global revenue coming from the liberal democratic country was much greater. Now the situation is changing also. In 5 years' time now, the countries like China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia will have a larger share of global revenue than those actually liberal democratic countries. So how much this factor, economic crisis or economic performance, play in this situation?
The situation in China, I'm still searching for things that are new. And one may be that all this high-tech equipment that governments now have, where we are watched all day. I mean, it's happening here in Lahore even with the CCTV on the streets, but in London it's absolutely all-pervasive that you are basically not ever unfilmed in London. And if there's a major crime, there is always film of it, even in quite outlying districts of London. All the email and everything that's done digitally is open to government intervention, and they are able to read this stuff. And of course, the height of it is China, where there is just this Orwellian state developing. So is that, let's just go to the States, are you noticing in your work, you're slightly running up against the system in terms of your day-to-day work, are you experiencing Orwellian type surveillance in your work?
Me personally?
Your organisation, the people you work with?
I mean, yeah, but everybody is, right? I mean, and again, I don't think that that's new. I think that the U.S. has been, I mean, I think there was a turning point after 9/11 in the States when the level of surveillance on everyone, especially on certain communities, especially Muslim communities, ratcheted up significantly, and they passed something called the Patriot Act, which is, there's a good example of like propaganda for you, calling something the Patriot Act that just allows you to surveil everyone, but it's like pretty well known that, the U.S. government agencies keep copies of everybody's email, and I don't think that they're actively reading it all the time just because the volume is so high, but I think if they ever become interested, they'll surely just pull it all up and read it. And anything I put on the internet, I assume that pretty much everyone at any point will have access to it. And I think that's true of everybody everywhere.
Well, doesn't that make people more nervous to do what Rick wants them to do, to resist?
I mean, I think
that's not an excuse. I mean, it's always been dangerous. It was dangerous in, and I'm sorry to keep using this analogy, but it was dangerous in Nazi Germany. What I think is not different, but it's just much more intense, is that with face recognition and voice recognition applications, and places like GCHQ, which are recording all mobile telephone conversations, and the computers are analysing them and looking for algorithms, that's a much more intense way of keeping filing codes on people, and it's therefore even more dangerous.